Jessica Fletcher and the Murder at Honeychurch Hall. Chapter 1. The Lady in the Conservatory. The countryside unfolded in shades of green and gold as the taxi made its winding approach to Honeychurch Hall. The manor rose in the distance like something from a period novel. Turrets crowned with moss, ivy draping the gray stone facade, and the early autumn wind rustling through a long row of ancient lindens. Jessica Fletcher, suitcase at her side and notebook tucked beneath her arm, sat upright as they reached the wrought iron gates. The sign read, Honeychurch Hall, a literary retreat for the discerning writer. Founded 1823, reimagined 2024. She smiled. It had been years since she'd visited this part of the English countryside, and never under such intriguing circumstances. Honeychurch Hall was known among literary circles as a haven for inspiration and seclusion. Each guest had a private room, a writing desk with a view, and access to the manor's legendary library. As the cab stopped in front of the main doors, a young man in a tweed vest and corduroy trousers stepped forward. "You must be Mrs. Fletcher," he said, extending a hand. "Simon Grady, house manager. It's an honor to have you." Jessica took his hand. "Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I must admit, I've heard stories about this place for years." Simon gave a sheepish smile. Yes. Some of them true, I'm afraid. Honeychurch Hall has a colorful past." Jessica chuckled. All the better for storytelling. Inside, the manor was even more beautiful than she imagined. Vaulted ceilings, walls lined with oil portraits and old clocks, and a smell of wood polish and worn leather that hinted at 1,000 unread manuscripts. Guests were already gathering in the lounge, a mix of acclaimed and aspiring writers. Jessica recognized a few from the publishing world, most notably Fiona Bell. A famous romance novelist with a sharp tongue and an even sharper reputation, Fiona sat regally near the fireplace, draped in a red silk shawl, sipping from a crystal glass. Her books had sold millions. Her enemies were nearly as numerous. Jessica approached her with a smile. "Fiona, it's been years." Fiona looked up and smiled, but her eyes were guarded. "Jessica Fletcher, I didn't think you'd show. Honeychurch is more gothic romance than cozy murder." Jessica laughed. "I go where the characters are." Fiona leaned closer. "Well, then you're in for a treat. This house has more secrets than a locked diary." Dinner that evening was held in the grand dining room. Candlelight shimmered off cut crystal. Guests included Rupert Delaney, Fiona's former writing partner turned bitter rival; Imelda Cross, the reclusive housekeeper with an unsettling stillness; Ethan March, a young poet who'd once been Fiona's student; and more, according to whispers. Cordelia Vale, a literary critic who'd long accused Fiona of plagiarizing plots. The meal was lively but tense. Underneath the polite laughter and clinking glasses, Jessica sensed old wounds reopening. Fiona, ever the provocateur, needled Cordelia about her latest overwritten obituary of a book. Rupert bit into his roast beef with the ferocity of a man pretending not to hear. "I suppose you'll be locking yourself in the conservatory again tonight?" Cordelia said snidely to Fiona over dessert. Fiona smiled coolly. "Where better to write the final chapter of my life?" A few guests chuckled uneasily. Jessica frowned. The next morning, the manor stirred to life slowly. A fog rolled across the fields outside, cloaking the gardens in pale gray. Jessica rose early, notebook in hand, and descended the stairs toward the conservatory. She had promised Fiona she'd join her for tea at 8, but the door was closed and locked. Jessica knocked once. No answer. She tried the handle again. Still locked. "Simon," she called to the house manager who had just appeared in the hallway. He hurried over, keys jangling from his hip. "That's odd. It's never locked from the inside." He opened the door. The scent of roses hit them first. Then silence. Then shock. Fiona Bell lay on the chaise in the conservatory, a red rose placed delicately on her chest, her lips slightly parted, eyes closed. Her manuscript lay beside her, pages scattered like fallen petals. A silver letter opener, engraved with a cursive F, was embedded in her chest. Simon backed away, pale as stone. Jessica moved forward with clinical calm, checking Fiona's wrist. Cold. Lifeless. She's dead, Jessica said softly. And this room was locked from the inside? Simon nodded, unable to speak. Jessica looked around. The only door was the one they'd opened. The windows were high, narrow, and latched from within. A classic locked room mystery. Jessica stood over Fiona's still form, the red rose on her chest already beginning to wilt. "I suppose you wrote your final chapter after all," she murmured. Then she turned toward the doorway as voices gathered behind them. The house had woken, and so had the secrets. Chapter 2, title: A Rose for Fiona. The conservatory of Honeychurch Hall, once bathed in early light and warmth from the stained glass ceiling, now felt like a cold tomb. The scent of roses, once lovely, had turned sickly. The letter opener remained embedded in Fiona Bell's chest, and the rose laid on her like punctuation. Constable Margaret Holloway arrived 20 minutes later, a no-nonsense woman in a dark green coat and boots that clacked sharply on the manor's stone floors. She took in the scene with practiced eyes. "Who found her?" she asked. "I did," Jessica said calmly. "With the house manager, Mr. Grady. The door was locked from the inside. We had to use his key." Holloway raised an eyebrow. "And you're—" "Jessica Fletcher," she replied. "I write murder mysteries." The constable's eyes narrowed. "Of course you do." The guests were gathered in the drawing room. Some whispered, some cried. Most watched one another with the alert, guarded look that came from knowing a killer might be sitting nearby. Constable Holloway began questioning them in pairs. Jessica listened carefully as each spoke. Rupert Delaney was flushed and stammering. "We had words, yes, but Fiona always said worse things than she meant. I certainly wouldn't. Well, I didn't." He had no alibi. Claimed to have been walking the West Gardens alone. Cordelia Vale, stiff as a pin, sat with her ankles crossed. "I went to bed around 10. I have no reason to kill Fiona. Her writing is already punishment enough." Jessica found the coldness in her tone telling. Ethan March, young, pale, nervously tugging at his scarf. "We hadn't spoken since the night before. I admired her. Even when I hated her. She brought out the best and worst in people." He claimed to have been writing in the library until after midnight, alone. Imelda Cross, the housekeeper, folded her hands in her lap. "I heard no sounds, but Miss Bell always locked herself in the conservatory when she was writing. She insisted. Said it kept the characters from escaping." Constable Holloway scribbled. Jessica asked gently, "Did Fiona often stay in the conservatory overnight?" "Frequently. She said the dawn light helped her finish her climaxes." Jessica noted it. That suggested the killer struck before dawn, and knew Fiona's habits. Later that morning, Holloway let Jessica re-enter the conservatory. Forensics had taken photographs and examined the body. The murder weapon, Fiona's own letter opener, was unremarkable except for being wiped clean of prints. The rose, however, was odd. Jessica knelt beside the scattered manuscript pages. The title page read, "The Wild Heart, Final Draft." The page beneath it was smeared with ink. Jessica examined it. Fiona had written something in the margin, hastily, unevenly. The ink had smudged where her hand or body must have fallen. Only 2 words remained legible. "He knew." Jessica whispered it aloud. She checked the next page. It was blank. Not missing. Blank. Was that deliberate? Or had the killer removed something? Back in the lounge, Jessica examined the manor's guest log. Fiona had arrived 2 days earlier. All guests had been scheduled for a week-long retreat. But one name had a check-in date that was scratched out and rewritten. Ethan March, originally scheduled to arrive after Fiona. He had arrived a day earlier instead. And that suggested premeditation. Jessica found him on the back patio, sipping weak tea, his eyes shadowed. "You knew Fiona well," she said. Ethan didn't answer right away. "She was my teacher, my tormentor, my muse." and sometimes, my lover. Jessica wasn't surprised. Did she know you were arriving early? No, he said. I wanted to surprise her. I hadn't seen her in over a year. You argued that night. Ethan's jaw tightened. She read one of my poems at dinner, loudly, mockingly. Said it was derivative. Then added that all good male writers were either thieves or cowards. Jessica tilted her head. Did you prove her right? He stood up fast. I didn't kill her. Jessica nodded slowly, watching his hands shake. But someone did, she said. And they wanted us to think it was poetic. Constable Holloway reconvened everyone that evening in the drawing room. We've confirmed the room was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. The letter opener is missing prints, and the rose has no stem, suggesting it was plucked recently. The gardens will be searched. Jessica spoke up. I believe the rose was symbolic. Fiona often used roses in her novels to indicate betrayal, specifically betrayal by someone close. Rupert scoffed. This isn't one of her tawdry books, Jessica. No, she said. But whoever killed her made it look like one. She turned to Imelda. You said Fiona often locked herself in the conservatory. So the killer knew she'd be alone. They knew where she kept her letter opener. And they left a single rose on her chest, as if they were finishing a scene. Cordelia looked ill. Jessica continued. I also found something on the last page of her manuscript. A final note, partially smudged. It read, he knew. Fiona realized something, just before she died. Ethan looked up sharply. She may have discovered her final draft had been tampered with, Jessica said. That someone had accessed her manuscript, perhaps to steal a plot or hide a secret. Rupert shook his head. She was paranoid, always locking pages in drawers. She once accused me of stealing an adjective. Imelda stood quietly. There was a night 2 weeks ago when Fiona phoned. Asked if her room had been searched. I told her no. But she seemed convinced someone had seen her new manuscript. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Then the killer didn't just want to silence her. They wanted to take her words. Cordelia suddenly stood and stormed from the room. Jessica watched her go. Perhaps it wasn't just the manuscript that had been stolen. Perhaps it was a life someone else wanted to rewrite. Chapter 3. Drafts and Deception. Jessica Fletcher didn't sleep much that night. The image of Fiona Bell, silk shawl askew and rose on her chest, haunted her like an unfinished chapter. The clues pointed in every direction. Yet the murder felt strangely personal, as though the killer had been writing a scene only they understood. She rose before dawn, wrapped in a cardigan, and slipped into the library, where the scent of aged paper and cedar mingled in the cool air. The fireplace crackled faintly, a few embers left glowing from the night before. Jessica sat at the large oak desk and reviewed her notes. Fiona's last words, he knew, echoed louder now. Knew what? Something about the manuscript? Or something buried deeper in the past? She turned to a binder left on the table labeled Retreat Schedule. Inside was a page that made her pause. Workshop Itinerary. From Draft to Death, How to Kill a Character. Facilitator, Fiona Bell. It had been scheduled for the morning of her death. Jessica scribbled a new theory. Did Fiona plan to reveal something during her workshop? Something someone was desperate to stop? After breakfast, Jessica joined Constable Holloway for a walk through the gardens. They passed the rose beds near the conservatory, now being inspected by 2 uniformed officers. One stem cut recently, Holloway said, pointing. Just before the murder, we believe. No thorns, no tags. Looks like it came from the Madame Hardy variety. Pure white with red streaks. Jessica tilted her head. Symbolism. Fiona used that exact rose on the cover of The Widow's Flame, a novel about a woman who poisons her rival using her own perfume bottle. Any chance this murder was inspired by one of Fiona's books? Jessica gave a thoughtful smile. More than a chance. It might be the blueprint. Back inside, Jessica paid another visit to Fiona's room. Constable Holloway had granted her access after confirming nothing else had been taken. The room was as Fiona had left it, dramatic and neat, like a staged photograph. Her notes sat on the writing desk beside a black leather folder. Jessica opened it. Inside was a printed email, folded neatly, from cordelia.vale@critique.co.uk. Subject: You're not the author. Fiona, you've stolen more than plots. You've built a career on borrowed words. You may have fooled the publishers, but not me. If that manuscript goes to press, I will expose everything. And this time, they'll believe me. Cordelia Jessica's eyes widened. Motive. Cordelia hadn't just disliked Fiona, she'd accused her of plagiarism, threatened to ruin her. That made two people with deep grievances. Ethan, the former student turned jilted lover, and Cordelia, the critic determined to destroy her career. She folded the email and tucked it into her notebook. Time to talk to Cordelia Vale. Cordelia stood at the stone overlook above the south garden, arms crossed, wrapped in a crimson shawl. You found it, didn't you? She said without turning. The letter. Jessica nodded. You threatened Fiona over her manuscript, accused her of stealing your work. Cordelia exhaled. She did. Years ago, before she was famous, we were both in a private writing group. She took the bones of my story, renamed the characters, and sold it. That novel launched her career. No one believed me. No proof. So you came here to stop her? Cordelia turned. To warn her. I found out she was rewriting that same plot, again. This time with my original title, The Wild Heart. It was too much. I told her if she tried to publish it, I'd go to the press. Jessica studied her. You didn't want her dead? I wanted her exposed, not murdered. But you were angry, Jessica said softly. So angry you stormed out of the room yesterday. Cordelia's eyes flashed. Yes, I was angry. But I don't kill people. I criticize them. Later that day, Jessica visited the manor's office to speak with Simon Grady, the house manager. He looked flustered, but more composed than the day before. There's something else, he said, handing her a sealed envelope. Fiona left this with me. Said I was to give it to her editor if anything happened to her. Jessica opened it carefully. Inside, a flash drive and a handwritten note. If anyone asks who wrote The Wild Heart, tell them, I did. Every word. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't death. It's making the truth undeniable. Fiona Jessica frowned. This wasn't a confession of guilt. It was a defense. And that raised a new possibility. Someone wasn't trying to silence Fiona for stealing their work. They were trying to stop her from revealing theirs. She pocketed the drive and returned to her room to open it on her laptop. It contained a full manuscript, The Wild Heart, Draft 5. She scanned the chapters quickly. One paragraph caught her eye. He said he came for closure. But when he looked at me, I saw fear in his eyes. As if I held more than memories. I held his name. Jessica leaned back, stunned. That wasn't fiction. It was Fiona's real story. About someone who'd been part of her past. A man. Someone who stood to lose everything if Fiona revealed him. She turned the notebook and underlined the words from the murder scene. He knew. Not she knew. He. And that changed everything. That evening, Jessica gathered the group in the drawing room. Constable Holloway stood behind her. There are many ways to kill a writer, Jessica began. With criticism, with scandal, with silence. She turned to Ethan March. You came here to surprise Fiona, but not with affection. You were afraid of what she'd written. Ethan paled. She was rewriting a memoir, Jessica continued. A fictionalized version of her early career. But hidden in her new book was the truth. That you had published work under another name. And she knew. Cordelia's eyes widened. Jessica went on. Fiona was going to out you. Not for plagiarism, but for identity theft. She claimed to have ghostwritten your first book. And her final draft included a scene that mirrored it exactly. Ethan tried to speak, but no sound came. Jessica stepped closer. You knew she'd sleep in the conservatory. You knew where she kept her rose shears and her letter opener. You took her manuscript, killed her, and left a rose to match the scene she once wrote for you. Constable Holloway moved forward and said, "Ethan March, you are under arrest for the murder of Fiona Bell." Ethan looked up, tears in his eyes. "She said she'd ruin me." Jessica replied, "She didn't ruin you. You did that yourself." Chapter 4. The Housekeeper's Silence. After Ethan March's arrest, a hush fell over Honeychurch Hall. It wasn't relief, nor satisfaction, more like a pause in the tension, like the breath between lines of poetry. But Jessica Fletcher wasn't entirely convinced the story had ended. The murder may have been solved on the surface, but the motive, the real one, remained muddy. Ethan had broken. Yes. But people don't kill just because of a few words in a manuscript. Something deeper had cracked inside him. Jessica wanted to understand why. She returned to the conservatory in the early afternoon, alone this time. The crime scene was clear, the manuscript pages now secured by the police. The sunlight poured through the colored glass ceiling, casting red and gold shadows across the floor tiles. A faint aroma still lingered. Roses and ink. The room felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by something left unsaid. She glanced toward the door, then toward the narrow side cabinet Fiona used as a storage nook. It had been overlooked in the investigation. Jessica opened it carefully. Inside, she found a small wooden box. Locked. She fetched a thin hairpin from her purse, a trick she'd learned during one of her earliest mystery adventures. And after a few clicks, the lock gave way. Inside the box, dozens of old letters bound with twine, each addressed to the same person. "Dear Imelda, my dearest Imelda, I still dream of Honeychurch." Jessica's eyes narrowed. Fiona and the housekeeper had a secret correspondence? She opened the top letter, dated nearly 25 years ago. "You told me never to return. But I am, and I hope you'll find a way to forgive me. What we had, what we did, it's not as buried as we hoped. You may live in silence, but I've made a life in ink. That's how I'll survive. That's how I'll confess. One day I'll write it all, and they'll read between the lines." Jessica replaced the box and quietly exited the room. Imelda Cross had been silent since the murder. Too silent. And Jessica knew silence often masked storms. She found Imelda in the rose garden, pruning a bush with slow, deliberate cuts. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and her eyes were focused but distant. Jessica approached slowly. "Beautiful roses," she said softly. Imelda didn't look up. "Fiona's favorite, always the red and white. She said they looked like spilled secrets." Jessica stood beside her. "You knew her better than anyone here, not just as a guest." A pause. "She once lived here," Imelda said. "Long before she was famous. Honeychurch Hall used to be different. A finishing school for troubled girls. Fiona was one of them. I was barely older. A groundsmaid." "She mentioned it in her letters," Jessica said. Imelda froze. "You read them?" "I found them." Imelda straightened, the shears trembling slightly in her hand. "Then you know." "I know there was something between you," Jessica said gently. "Something real. And that you parted badly." Imelda nodded once, eyes misting. "We were young, angry. She left, and I stayed. She wrote me for years. I never wrote back." "Why?" Imelda's voice was barely a whisper. "Because I told her not to return. Because I was afraid of what we did." Jessica waited. Imelda finally met her gaze. "There was an accident. A girl named Violet, back when Honeychurch was still a school. She died. In the West Tower. Fiona was there. So was I." Jessica's breath caught. "What happened?" "We were sneaking out, Fiona, me, and Violet. She slipped, hit her head, fell down the stairwell. But it wasn't just an accident. Fiona had pushed her. Not violently, just in frustration, a childish fight. But it was enough." Jessica's voice was soft. "You covered it up. We told the headmistress she fell. They closed the tower, sealed it. Fiona was expelled. I stayed on. And the secret stayed buried." Jessica felt a chill despite the sun. "Fiona was afraid it would come out. She wrote me that she was going to finally tell the truth, that she'd write it as fiction. Jessica blinked. The manuscript. Imelda nodded slowly. That's why I warned her not to publish it. It would ruin everything. It would dishonor Violet. Her family still lives in the village. Jessica whispered. And if Ethan had read that story, if he recognized himself as part of a cover-up. Imelda nodded. He wouldn't risk it. He's one of Violet's cousins. Jessica stared at her. You knew. I didn't know he'd kill her, but I feared what Fiona's truth might do. Jessica stepped back. That was Fiona's final revenge, not against Ethan, not against you, but against herself. She couldn't carry the secret anymore. Imelda set the shears down and sat on the garden bench, her hands shaking. I didn't kill her, Jessica. But maybe I let her die. Jessica sat beside her. Maybe. Or maybe you gave her the courage to tell the truth. A pause. Imelda whispered. Is that what justice looks like? After all these years? Jessica looked toward the west tower of the house, its windows boarded, its past sealed in silence. Justice, she said softly, sometimes arrives as a whisper, not a verdict. Later that evening, Jessica walked to the base of the west tower. A plaque had been placed there long ago, nearly faded by time. In memory of Violet Graham, 1997 to 2014. She touched the stone gently. I think Fiona kept her promise, she murmured. Then she returned to her room and wrote 2 words at the top of a new page. Chapter 5. The Locked Room. Lie. The truth was out. But the story wasn't over. Chapter 5. The Locked Room. Lie. It was well past midnight when Jessica Fletcher sat once again at the oak writing desk in the library of Honeychurch Hall. Her notebook was open before her, the lines filled with observations, timelines, and troubling contradictions. Outside, the wind whispered against the manor's ivy-covered walls, and the great house creaked faintly, as if it too held memories it couldn't forget. She tapped the end of her pen against the words she had circled twice, locked from the inside. That detail had bothered her since the beginning. The conservatory where Fiona Bell had been found dead was latched from within. Yet Fiona was not the type to die by her own hand. The evidence pointed to Ethan, his motive, his panic, his access to Fiona's manuscript. But Jessica knew the truth was rarely so tidy. It was time to revisit the scene, not just as a mystery writer or investigator, but as a witness to human behavior. Because the locked door wasn't just a logistical puzzle. It was a message. Early the next morning, she returned to the conservatory. Simon Grady, the house manager, accompanied her with his ever-present ring of keys. The crime scene had long been cleared, but Jessica had requested access to one specific item that had been overlooked, the internal latch mechanism on the conservatory's sole door. This room, Jessica said, inspecting the heavy oak frame, was Fiona's sanctuary. Simon nodded. She often locked herself in for hours, said she couldn't hear her characters unless the rest of the world was shut out. Jessica examined the door. The lock was indeed internal, a simple brass bolt latch. But there was something else. A narrow gap beneath the door, barely half an inch high. She knelt and measured it with a pen. Simon, when we found Fiona, did you notice if the floor inside the conservatory was dusty or disturbed? Simon looked thoughtful. There was some fallen rose petal debris, I remember. Why? Jessica stood up slowly. Because this door could have been locked after Fiona was already dead. From the outside. Simon looked confused. But how? Jessica motioned to the base of the door. If someone fashioned a simple hook or a stiff wire, they could slip it under the door and push the latch closed. It wouldn't be perfect, but with enough practice. She left the thought hanging. Simon paled. So the killer wanted it to appear impossible. Exactly, Jessica said softly. A locked room mystery staged by someone who wanted to confuse us, delay discovery, or write their own ending. She turned toward the conservatory window. And I think I know who. Jessica found Constable Holloway in the foyer, clipboard in hand. "I need your help with one more angle," Jessica said. "It involves the morning Fiona was discovered." Holloway arched an eyebrow. "Go on." "Ethan March may have delivered the fatal blow," Jessica said, "but someone else helped him stage the scene. Someone who knew exactly how to manipulate appearances." Holloway frowned. "You're suggesting a second party?" "I'm suggesting a conspirator. One who had the motive to protect the house, the history, and themselves." Jessica pulled out the letter from Fiona's box, the one addressed to Imelda. She knew Fiona was going to write about Violet Graham. She feared the damage it would do. But she also knew Ethan had a temper, a history of instability. "Are you saying Imelda was present?" Holloway asked. Jessica nodded. "Not during the murder, but afterward. I believe Ethan confessed to her, panicked, and Imelda helped stage the locked room to protect him." Holloway's jaw tightened. Jessica continued. "Imelda had the tools, the knowledge of the house, and a personal stake in keeping Violet's death buried. That's why she said she let Fiona die. It was more literal than we thought." Confronting Imelda Cross was not something Jessica took lightly. The housekeeper had served Honeychurch Hall for nearly 30 years. Her silence had always been mistaken for discretion. But now, it held the weight of conspiracy. They met in the small chapel behind the manor, where Imelda often went in the mornings to tend to flowers. "You knew Ethan was involved?" Jessica said softly. Imelda didn't respond. "You didn't kill Fiona, but you helped him lock the door afterward. He panicked, came to you. You've protected this house your whole life. You didn't want a scandal, not after what happened with Violet." Imelda finally turned. Her eyes were wet but calm. "I told him to turn himself in," she said. "He wouldn't. Said he'd end his own life before he let the story come out." "And you believed him?" "I did," she whispered. "So I helped him stage the lock. I thought it would delay things, give him time to disappear." Jessica's heart ached. "You gave him an alibi instead, until the manuscript was found." Imelda nodded slowly. Fiona's story wasn't just a novel. It was a confession, but also a trap. She baited him. Jessica knelt beside her. "You made a mistake, but you still have time to tell the truth." Imelda clutched the edge of the altar. "Will it matter?" Jessica looked out the stained glass window, where a soft light filtered in. "It always matters." By evening, Constable Holloway had taken a full statement. Imelda admitted her part. Ethan's charges were amended to include conspiracy, though he now claimed responsibility for the act itself. Jessica stood alone near the West Tower once more. The truth, buried for years in silence, had finally emerged. Imperfect, tragic, but real. Honeychurch Hall had always been a place for fiction. But for once, the story didn't end on the page. It ended in honesty. Jessica returned to her notebook that night. Chapter 6. Footnotes to a Murder. The morning fog hung low over the hills beyond Honeychurch Hall, casting the landscape in soft, wavering grays. Jessica Fletcher sat by the fireplace in the library, sipping a cup of dark, bracing tea, her notebook open before her like a crime scene itself, marked in bullet points, arrows, and underlined phrases. Ethan March had confessed. Imelda Cross had admitted to helping him stage the locked room. Fiona Bell's death had, on paper, been solved. And yet Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that the final sentence of this story had not yet been written. It was a gut instinct, one honed over decades of mysteries, both fictional and painfully real. Something still didn't fit, and it started with the wild heart. Jessica requested a full digital copy of Fiona Bell's manuscript from the constable's evidence room. With permission granted, she sat that afternoon in the upstairs reading room, the manor quiet around her. Fiona's last novel was sharp, emotional, and, most tellingly, autobiographical. The protagonist, a woman named Lillian, closely mirrored Fiona herself, but buried between the chapters of drama and desire. Jessica began noticing footnotes, not literal ones, symbolic ones. Subtle details repeated with unusual precision. Names of fictional minor characters that matched staff records from Honeychurch's time as a finishing school. A series of numbers etched into a necklace. a poem embedded into dialogue that mirrored a memorial stone's inscription in the West Tower garden. Jessica's pen froze on the third read-through. And he carried the weight not only of what he did, but what he read and what he erased. Jessica whispered aloud, "Erased." She turned to the final pages. There it was. A paragraph missing entirely, its space marked with an asterisk. Not removed by an editor. Not redacted. Just blank. As if someone had deleted it from the digital file itself. Jessica immediately sought out Simon Grady, the house manager. She found him in the manor's archives, sorting boxes of author applications from previous retreats. "Simon," she said carefully, "was anyone else in Fiona's room after she died? Aside from police?" Simon looked up. "Only me, just to lock it. I made sure nothing was touched." "Why?" Jessica hesitated. "The manuscript she left behind, digitally, it's missing part of the ending, a blank paragraph. It may have been deleted by someone with access to her laptop." Simon's brows furrowed. "We collected her belongings for evidence, but now that you mention it, her laptop was open when I found it. I assumed she'd just left it running." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "And the day after her death, were any Wi-Fi access logs saved?" Simon blinked. "You'd have to ask Alfred, the IT man, but yes, the system logs all connections." Alfred, a gangly technician with ink-stained fingers, met Jessica an hour later in the staff office. "You're asking if someone logged into Fiona's laptop after she died?" he asked. "Exactly," Jessica said. "And whether anything was uploaded, downloaded, or deleted." He tapped away at a slim keyboard, eyes scanning quickly. "There's something here. Look." The day after her body was found, at exactly 7:43 a.m., her device was accessed remotely from within the network. Short session. Less than 10 minutes. And this, he clicked. A deletion of one file. Document title, confession draft, violetg.xc.x. Jessica's breath caught. Who accessed it? Alfred stared at the screen. Simon Grady. Jessica confronted Simon in the drawing room as dusk rolled in. "I know you accessed Fiona's laptop the day after she died," she said, notebook in hand. "You deleted a file she named after Violet Graham. Why?" Simon froze. "I was trying to protect her," he said quietly. "Fiona?" "No," he whispered. "Violet, my sister." Jessica stared. Simon nodded. "No one here remembers her. She died so young, but she was clever, brilliant. Fiona knew that. They were friends once, close, before that fight. But Violet's death destroyed our family. My parents moved away. I stayed." "And you found out Fiona was writing about her?" Jessica asked. He nodded. "The night before Fiona died, I overheard her and Ethan arguing. I didn't realize what it was about until I found the draft in her folder. She was turning Violet into a footnote in her story. A plot twist. I couldn't let that happen." "So you deleted it," Jessica said softly. "After she was dead. I didn't kill her, but I didn't want her legacy to be built on my sister's grave." Jessica stood in silence. "You made the same choice Imelda did," she said. "You didn't kill, but you tried to silence a truth that was too painful to face." Simon looked away. Jessica took a deep breath. And yet the truth survived. In the margins, in the metaphors. Fiona made sure of it. That night, Jessica returned to the memorial garden below the West Tower. A candle had been placed beside Violet's name. She stood there for a long time. Fiona Bell had done something rare. She had confessed not just through words, but through intent. Her story had named no names, but it had dared to remember the forgotten, and it had cost her her life. Jessica sat beneath the old willow tree and opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote, "Fiona Bell was many things. Brilliant, arrogant, flawed. But she was also brave. And bravery, when written with clarity, becomes literature." She underlined the word literature and added, Chapter 7. The Final Rewrite. Jessica Fletcher stood in the manor's great library once more. The morning light cutting thin gold blades through the tall windows. Her notebook lay open before her, But it was no longer a collection of speculation and loose threads. Now it was a map. Each entry, quote, and clue, drawing a line toward a final truth she could no longer ignore. Fiona Bell hadn't merely been murdered. She had been edited out of her own story. And the people who had done it hadn't used knives or poison. At least not at first. They had used memory, silence, fear, and finally, one of them had used a letter opener. Jessica's next step was both painful and necessary. She was going to rewrite the ending. Not in fiction, but in fact. It began with a quiet knock on the door to Ethan March's temporary holding room. The local constabulary had set him up in one of the rear guest rooms under guard until he could be formally transported. He looked smaller than Jessica remembered, slumped, unshaven, defeated. "I've already confessed," he muttered. Jessica nodded. "I know, but not everything, and not honestly." He said nothing. Jessica took a chair across from him. "You didn't kill Fiona because she wronged you. You killed her because she was going to reveal something about you that you couldn't live with." Ethan stared down. "You didn't just ghostwrite with her. You were the ghost. Fiona wrote the poems you built your career on, didn't she?" He stiffened. "I read The Wild Heart," Jessica went on. "Buried inside it are references to lines you later published under your name, years after you stopped working with her. You repackaged her work, rephrased her metaphors. You even mimicked her rhythm." His voice was hoarse. "She told me it didn't matter." "She lied," Jessica said. "She lied to keep you close. But in her final book, she was ready to reveal the truth. Not out of spite, but because she'd had enough of silence." Ethan looked up then, and for the first time, his eyes weren't panicked. They were ruined. "I wanted to be great," he whispered, "and she made me feel like I could be. But then, she threatened to take it all back, to show the world I was a fraud." Jessica's voice was quiet. "So you silenced her, then let others carry the burden of your guilt." He nodded once. "I didn't ask Imelda to help. She saw me that morning, standing outside the conservatory. I was still holding the manuscript. I must have looked lost." "And she guessed what you'd done," Jessica said. "She said we could fix it, that if we made it look clean, maybe no one would look deeper." Jessica stood. She was wrong. Later that afternoon, Jessica met with Constable Holloway and turned over her notebook. Inside it were her complete findings, motive, timeline, and the literary evidence embedded within Fiona's last manuscript that exposed the truth about Ethan's career, and Fiona's role in it. "You'll need to call in a literary expert to corroborate the writing style theory," Jessica said. "But it's all there, and Imelda's confession confirms the staged crime scene." Holloway nodded, her face stony but satisfied. "You've given us more than enough. I'll see to it the right charges are filed. The courts will decide the rest." Jessica closed her notebook for the last time. "This wasn't about ego," she said. "It was about identity and shame." Holloway sighed. "Murder often is." By evening, the house began to breathe again. Guests departed. Staff resumed their quiet routines. Honeychurch Hall, once teetering between past and present, seemed to find balance. Jessica stood by the fireplace where Fiona Bell had once claimed her seat like a queen of the written word. Her voice would never again echo through the halls, but her story would. Jessica had ensured it. Simon Grady approached quietly, holding something in his hands. "A first edition," he said, offering her a leather-bound book. "The Widow's Flame. She inscribed it to me years ago. Said I was the only one who could make roses bloom in winter." Jessica took the book, smiling faintly. "She was difficult," Simon added. "But she was brilliant. And she wasn't cruel. Not really." "No," Jessica agreed. "She just lived without compromise. And those who do often make enemies." Simon nodded. "What will happen to Honeychurch Hall?" Jessica looked around. "It'll go on. This house has seen more than most. But I'd recommend you open the West Tower again." Simon blinked. "Why?" "Because it's time Violet's memory stopped being hidden." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll speak to the board." Jessica handed him back the book. Let her work be remembered, but let the truth be remembered too. That night, Jessica took one final walk through the gardens. The moon was full, hanging like a pale silver coin over the hilltops. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of moss and fading roses. She stopped beneath the ancient weeping willow near the conservatory. A small plaque had been quietly placed at its base. In memory of Fiona Bell. Words are lives we leave behind. Jessica smiled gently. As tributes go, it wasn't grand, but it was honest. And for a writer, that was enough. She opened her notebook one last time and wrote, Chapter 8. The Truth at Honeychurch Hall. The last morning at Honeychurch Hall dawned bright and unusually warm for autumn. Light streamed through the leaded windows in soft golden shafts, warming the old stone floors and casting long shadows from the antique furniture. The manor, once cloaked in secrets, now felt strangely peaceful. Like a book closed at last, its final page read and understood. Jessica Fletcher packed slowly. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, half filled with the familiar contents of her travels. Notebooks, worn paperbacks, a wool cardigan, a half-eaten sleeve of digestive biscuits. Outside her window she could see the rose garden, still damp with dew. Imelda Cross stood quietly among the bushes, not pruning or tending, just standing. Jessica watched her for a moment, then turned back to finish her packing. She wasn't one to linger, but Honeychurch had a way of holding on to people, just like its stories. Downstairs, Simon Grady waited beside the hearth. His usual crisp posture had softened, his hands folded behind his back, a nervousness lingering around him like mist. You'll be missed here, he said, as Jessica descended the staircase. Jessica gave a modest smile. Let's hope for less dramatic circumstances next time. He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I've sent word to Violet's family, he said. Told them the truth. About the tower. About Fiona's role. About mine. Jessica placed a hand on his arm. That was the right thing to do. They thanked me, he said, voice hushed. But they also asked me why it took 30 years. Jessica said nothing. Some truths didn't come with comforting answers. Imelda's retired, Simon added. Handed me her keys this morning. Said it was time to let the house breathe without her. Jessica nodded. She gave more than most ever do. They stood in silence for a beat. Then he handed her a small brown envelope. I almost forgot. This came for you. Arrived by post this morning. No return address. Jessica opened it slowly. Inside was a single page from Fiona Bell's manuscript. The missing paragraph. Typed. Unedited. Unapologetic. They will say I was vindictive. They will say I was cruel. But what they won't say is that I lied. I told stories to survive. I exposed pain to make sense of it. And now, I offer this. Not as revenge, but as testimony. I was there. I saw her fall. I saw what silence did to us all. Beneath it was one final line, written in Fiona's hand. You always did know how to read between the lines, Jessica. Jessica folded the letter and placed it carefully inside her notebook. The truth had always been there, just hidden behind punctuation and prose. Outside, the remaining guests had gathered to say their goodbyes. Cordelia Vale stood stiffly near the fountain, her eyes red but composed. She approached Jessica with something unexpected in her hand. A worn copy of The Wild Heart, freshly typeset, the name Fiona Bell still glittering in gold on the front. I've written the foreword, Cordelia said, offering it. Jessica took the book, surprised. Cordelia cleared her throat. It doesn't forgive her, but it honors her. And maybe that's what matters. Jessica nodded slowly. It is. Cordelia looked down. She was a better writer than I ever gave her credit for. Infuriating, dazzling, and dangerous. Jessica smiled. Like all the best stories. Her final walk through Honeychurch Hall took her to the West Tower. The sealed stairwell had been opened. Fresh white paint covered the old wood, and the door stood ajar. She stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams slanting through the tall window. A plaque was mounted on the far wall now, just above where Violet Graham had fallen. Violet Graham, 1997 to 2014. May truth bloom where silence once grew. Jessica stood there a long while. She wasn't a religious woman, but something about this space felt sacred. The truth, once buried, once avoided, now stood quietly in the light. She whispered, "You're remembered now," then turned and walked down the steps. The taxi arrived on schedule. Jessica gave one last look to the manor as it faded behind the rolling green hedges. Her notebook sat in her lap, closed, but heavy with what had come to pass. She had come to Honeychurch Hall expecting a quiet week among writers. Instead, she had found betrayal, guilt, forgotten grief, and, finally, justice. As the countryside slipped by outside the window, Jessica opened her notebook again and turned to a fresh page. She wrote, "Epilogue. A writer's retreat is meant to be a place for stories. But when the truth becomes too sharp, too real, it will always find a way to rise, between the lines, inside the ink, buried under roses." Fiona Bell didn't write her final chapter alone. We all wrote it with her. The readers, the liars, the mourners, even the killers. She left behind a murder, yes, but also a mirror. And sometimes, the most dangerous mysteries are the ones that tell us who we really are. Jessica paused. Then she underlined 3 words. Honeychurch is listening, and she closed the book.